Well, greetings and salutations, everyone. I hope everyone is doing well today. Today I have a very informative and terrifying video to share with you. Before we get into it, though, a couple links. As you know, I rely on Patreon, PayPal, and my merch to help the channel to continue to grow and go. The links to Patreon and PayPal are in the description below, my merch displayed directly under the video. Also, Dogman Frightening Encounters, Volume 1, 2, and 3, the audiobook versions. They were written and researched by Tom Lyons, narrated and produced by me, Jeffrey Nadolny. Those audiobooks are available on Audible, Amazon, and iTunes, the links to which are also in the description as well. And finally, last but definitely not least, if you'd really like to help support this channel to continue to grow and go, simply subscribe, click the like button, and please leave a comment. It really does help. And it does matter. And now, everyone, I have taken far too much of your time. Let's get on with today's upload, shall we? About a week ago, I did an upload, and I included a encounter that I had shared a while back. And that encounter actually mentioned this encounter. Now, there have been a ton of subscriber encounters sent to me. They are all terrifying. They are all informative on their own right. But a few have really just resonated, I guess. And this would be one of them. This encounter has stuck with me in my head since the day I narrated it. And then I had the subscriber come on and share it in his own words as well. So we can actually really learn a lot from this about dogmen and their behavior. Let's get into it. Today's first encounter. I'm a former paramedic who plays EMT on the weekends now. I always thought if I were to experience something paranormal at work, it would be in any number of the ambulances I've used on the account of all the souls that have passed through. My partner and I this night were not that lucky. I used to work in a moderately sized city in central Connecticut, and our company covered surrounding towns and had contracts to cover inter-hospital transfers and things like that, much further away from our 911 coverage area. City itself is only a couple of 100,000 people with suburbs and a river valley, and then rural woods beyond. Nothing special. We had to respond to a fringe in our coverage area, another town in another corner of the state, literally nicknamed the Quiet Corner, because it is so low populated and very heavily wooded. After almost getting there, we wound up being canceled by a closer unit en route. It was 4:30 in the morning on a Wednesday in the autumn of 2010. Where we were turning around was in a notoriously small one-stoplight town. The ride back to civilization from where we were was only a 20 to 30-minute trip, but it's a long, straight, two-lane state route, with dim streetlights and thick forest on both sides, with occasional residences and very few small businesses. We turned off of State Route 44 and onto a road named Pumpkin Hill Road, which, after a couple more turns onto side streets, was going to drop us off further down 44 in the direction we needed to be going. Surrounding us was state forest and a couple of dirt roads, a couple of small rivers, a small lake, and not an awful lot of homes. The homes that are there are spaced pretty far apart as well. I was riding in the passenger seat with my face in the laptop, writing our canceled tag, mentally preparing to go home after a long night. And my partner asked, "Do you see that?" and began to slow down. Pumpkin Hill was a gravel road that's fairly narrow, and we had a jet black forest on both sides of us. Visibility in front of us was clear, but to the sides You couldn't see past the 5 to 6 foot tall hedgerow that lined the road just beyond the guardrail. The cab was illuminated by the laptop, so I shut it and looked up, squinted a little. And there I saw it, only 100 feet away or so, right in front of us. A very large dog. A very large dog that's silvery/gray with straight cropped ears with little tufts atop of them, walking away from us ever so slowly, with a very unusual gait. Almost like it was limping. Damn thing had to be 4.5 feet at the shoulders. My partner slows to a crawl, thinking it's hurt and maybe has a tag or a collar. We thought surely such a magnificent beast had to have an owner. As we slowed to a crawl, some crap happened that I will never unsee or forget, and it's the day I started to believe that not all things are what they seem. The idle of the ambulance isn't its usual roar. We're just creeping at about 5 miles an hour and gaining. I was on the passenger side, and it was on my side of the road. The plan was for my partner to put the flashers on and for me to whistle or hoot to see if our new friend was acclimated to humans and if it needed help, or if he was street tough and to just let him on his way. We closed the 100-foot gap to about 25 to 30. As we closed our distance, and right at the 10-yard mark or so, my partner and I simultaneously got a sense of dread. I was suddenly very aware of how much crap I was in, and my blood turned cold. The hair on my arms and neck were standing on end. My vision narrowed. My heart started pumping well over 120 beats per minute. This dog stood up. He just stood up. Not like a domestic dog or a bear or a domestic cat would. Their movements are kind of awkward when they stand, and they're usually pretty quick to go back to all fours after a couple steps. And we do have black bears here, but this definitely was not a black bear. It was too big. This creature was meant to stand up, and it did it as fluently as you and I would. My view of this was from behind, and this thing's shoulders would have put an NFL defensive end to shame. It was a massive animal. My partner stopped the truck. The beast cocked its head to the side ever so slightly, to the left, revealing a single yellowish-green glowing eye. Then turned to my side, the right side of the woods, and bolted. It was over before it even started. What my partner and I had always called the werewolf, we estimated him to be around 7.5 feet tall. Our ambulance is a little over 13-foot clearance, and with the tufts of its ears lined up with about where our emergency lights were on, the front of the top of the truck. The top of its head ended about where the windshield ended. Its shoulders were easily twice the size of a man's, maybe 4.5 feet to 5 feet. Its back muscles were well developed, and it had a tapered waist which led to a bushy 3 to 4 foot long tail, and I kept referring to him because he had enormous testicles. How it walked without those things dragging on the ground, I have no idea. Its quadriceps, if I had to guess, were the size of a man's waist, anywhere between 34 to 40 inches. Its legs bent backward like a canine, and I could make out that it had an Achilles heel and a massive clawed foot. The upper body's details were more alarming to take in. The ears were cropped like a Doberman's. They stood straight up, and the tufts atop of them were a few inches themselves. When it snapped its head to the side to acknowledge us, it laid its ears flat back on its head. He was all business when he did that. I got a perfect profile of his face, and it had a rigid, straight cheekbones, which led away from its face and towards a gigantic muzzle. The socket around its eyes looked incredibly human, and the eye itself was probably the size of a racquetball, and it was not reflecting light from our scene or headlights. It was definitely glowing a yellowish green. The muzzle could have been a foot long, and it had a big old, shiny, maybe wet dog nose at the end. Its mouth was partially open when it turned its head, and then it looked like it swallowed. I only caught a second or two long glimpse of its mouth. Its gums were black, and it had a dark, maybe purplish tongue. Its teeth were bright white, and it had 2 pairs of fangs. They weren't incisors or inside of its mouth. It had a pair of fangs that sat at the front and outside of its mouth, and at the front and bottom of its mouth. With its mouth closed, you could still see them, and these were teeth designed for puncturing, ripping, and tearing off. And off of its incredible shoulders were its arms, which were jacked and almost twice as long as its legs. The claws of the werewolf ended around to where its knees were, and its claws, maybe to be 5 to 6 inches long. The claws were attached to the digits at the end of a hand and did not look anything like a paw. Its forearms were longer than what is humerus would be, and made up the majority of its arm itself. Above the elbow were its biceps, which, if I had to guess, were somewhere around 40 inches around and well defined. Watching it stand up so fluidly made sense looking back, as it obviously used the power in its legs and did a sort of push-up with its gigantic long arms to spring into that position. The thing that has always bothered me, though, is that little head tilt he did. I got the sense of dread before he stood up, like my mind and body knew something bad was about to happen, but it didn't know what. It was almost telekinetic, if that makes sense. I just got this feeling from this werewolf, like, I know you mean well, move on, and I was never here. Then it vanished. The expression on its face wasn't angry or a scowl. It was more of a look of indifferent annoyance. Like it was saying, "Aw man, who the hell are you? I have to deal with this now?" When it rolled to the right, it bent its legs and just leapt straight up and over the hedgerows and guardrail. Didn't do a running start or even a squat that much. Just turned and jumped. And when he did, he kept his body elongated. So from a standing position, it went at least 6 or 7 feet in the air and far enough in back of and over the bush not to be seen easily anymore. After easy 10 or 15 feet. After that, my partner punched it, and we drove fairly recklessly to get off that gravel road and back to one of the many little streets that led us to a main street with streetlights. I would never asked him to slow down. We both wanted to get out of there, and we fled with a sense of urgency. I have seen many canines stand on their hind legs. I've never seen a hellhound sprint with precision over a guardrail and brush. That messed with my head other than that night. After a lot of research, I came upon legends of the Michigan Dogman, the Beast of Bray Road. The only problem is I live in Connecticut, and we are not known for our Bigfoot sightings or wacky cryptozoological stories. The town of Pomfrey, Connecticut, which was close by to the town we were in, does have some interesting wolf lore, and a park named Wolf Den State Park. The short version of the story is that General Israel Putnam, that General Putnam, the Revolutionary War semi-hero, killed the last wolf in Connecticut in a wolf den, I think at around 1764, right before the conflict. The story, as I recall, wolves in Connecticut were hell on the livestock, and settlers had killed the last of the she-wolf's cubs and her mate. The story goes she started slaughtering livestock and stalking and attacking people, not to eat but to kill. One morning she massacred over 70 sheep, and Israel Putnam was tasked with putting her down. He tracked her to her den and did so. The wolf den is still there to this day. There have been dogman sightings close by in Massachusetts, and even a legitimate gray wolf sighting. In the last decade or so, wolves have been finding their way down New England from Canada. I don't know what I believe in, and it's certainly not werewolves, but I totally saw something that really looked like a werewolf just that one time. My partner and I had worked together in that ambulance for 3 years at the time of the sighting. We knew each other pretty well. And as alarming the events that transpired in front of us were, there was something off about Bob for weeks after the sighting. The ride back to operations, we just could not believe what we had just seen and exchanged things like, WTF was that? And, I don't know, I saw the same thing you did. And, did that really just effing happen? I can't believe that just effing happened. After we fueled our truck, we punched out, and on the next I saw him was a Thursday night for our last tour of the week before our 3 days off. When I showed up, he notified me that he had called dispatch and requested to be posted in downtown the entire night, not wanting to leave the confines of the inner city. Not an unusual or an odd request. Some people prefer the busier assignments, and we definitely did, but it became a habit for Bob. And as weeks and months went by, we were never sent out to suburbia for a call after dark for the rest of our 5 total years together. I thought I was just as shaken up as he was, but something was sitting sideways with the way he was acting. And every time I approached him to talk about it, he would just immediately dismiss the topic and be stoic and quiet or change the subject entirely, leaving an odd vibe I had never felt around my work brother before. Absolutely nothing changed about our job performance and our friendship, but after a while, I suspected my partner had either seen something like this before or had seen something that I hadn't that night of the sighting. After years of patiently prodding him and asking him what was wrong, he finally disclosed what was bothering him so much about that sighting. And it turned out to be the latter. 9 years later, I have his permission to relay his point of view. Our ambulance was a 2008 AEV box truck. It had a 13-foot clearance, and Bob is 6'5", I'm 5'10", but when seated in the cab, sitting up and facing forward, the top of our heads were probably somewhere around 7.5 to 8 feet off the deck. As a passenger, you can't see an awful lot out of the mirrors, but as a driver, you can see down the side of the truck and pretty well behind you. There's also a mobile data terminal that controlled several functions, including lights, sirens, scene lights, dispatch response, and it also had a 4-screen camera that showed a backup camera, which was mounted on top of the back pointing down at an angle, 2 side cameras, which covered the outside ends of the ambulance, and a patient compartment camera, which is the only one that recorded. When you were the driver's seat, you had pretty much all 360 degrees covered. As a passenger, the most you could see out of the mirrors was jack crap, especially since Bob was a giant, and we fought over the mirror angles all the time. As relayed to me by him, Bob said that when he completely stopped, he was looking at the werewolf in front of us, but had a pit in his stomach convincing him that he was not actually looking at us when he turned his head. My eyes were fixated in front of us on this werewolf number 1, Bob trusting his instincts, and which I did not notice him doing because I was busy trying not to piss myself, already had the MDT angled right at him and started cycling through the cameras and turned the side and rear scene lights on. The scene lights aren't the emergency lights. Scene lights are these bright white and blue hued LED lights that are so bright you could probably land a space shuttle from the orbit with them. When he did that, he noticed that our friend in front of us was in fact not alone. Bob caught a glimpse of 2 of them behind us and 1 coming up on my side of the ambulance. The 2 behind us he described as Coyote Tan, and on all 4s, standing right in what would be our blind spot. The way the camera in the back is angled, he said all he could see were the tops of their heads and the tops of their torsos, their arms and shoulders, and their massive pawed hands. He described them exactly was the first one, except the color variation. When he turned the scene lights on, they bolted to the right side of the road out of view of the camera. This is where it gets a little creepier. After watching their shadow and movements going to the right towards the tree line and brush, Bob cycled the MDT monitor on the starboard side camera, hoping to catch them and see if they were going to advance towards us or run in the brush. Mind you, this is all happening quickly, in the matters of seconds. When he cycled the camera, what he saw was another dogman. This one was on its hind legs and blacker than the blackest black, so massive it was filling the entire monitor, and with its left hand was trying to open the door in the patient compartment area. Ron had hit the scene lights and cycled the camera and lost sight of the two coyote tan dogmen. As he couldn't see too much from the camera view, he looked in the passenger side mirror and said when he did, the black dogman looked right back at him with these yellow eyes and grinned. He did say the coyote tan dogman leapt over the brush behind the grinning one. He told me, "Danny, if you rolled your window down and reached your arm out, you guys could have shook hands." When he told me this, almost a decade after the incident, my blood ran cold again. He didn't discuss it for years, and all this time I had no idea one was less than 5 feet behind my right shoulder. He said the grinning dogman was a sinister-looking son of a bitch. It was clearly trying to stealthily open the patient compartment door on the right side of the bus. Luckily, the locks engage when the vehicle is in motion. When it was staring at him in the mirror with this toothy grin, it moved its head and saw the dogman we initially spotted jump over the brush and then followed suit. My partner said it stopped grinning and almost looked like it was having a chuckle to itself. Honestly, he looked like an asshole. Turned to the right and jumped up over the guardrail with the rest of his pack. As we drove away, I rolled my window down, and we heard very loud, almost like chirping or yapping. It was more like the sounds hyenas make. When I did that, Bob said, "Roll that back up. What the F is the matter with you?" As we sped away, it was over. The whole event couldn't have lasted more than a minute and a half from when we first spotted him at 100 feet down the road. Knowing my partner's side of the story now, after all these years, what bothers me the most is, which is what probably bothered him for so long, is where did the other three come from? And what was their plan? What if I was someone alone in a Prius or a Mini Cooper or something? I'd be wolf crap. Were they out for a prowl, just looking to ambush motorists, messing with people? They were so intelligent to move into the blind spots and had a distraction in front like a classic ambush maneuver. After having thought, I settled my nerves over the even years ago now. I have so many more questions I'm afraid I will never have answers to. That's what my partner swears happened the night we saw the wolf beast on Pumpkin Hill Road in a sleepy little corner of Connecticut in our ambulance. Now, I had actually received and narrated and interviewed this case probably a year before I started looking into Brenda Hamilton or Dr. Nancy Shaw, the doctor who was attacked in Georgia while in her car on the outskirts of some town somewhere. And I think Bluebird or something like that. But she was found in a smaller car, door open, and her body was in a ditch, like diagonally from her car. So I was wondering if these creatures that these guys saw, not the same ones, but I'm wondering if that's what happened to Dr. Nancy Shaw. I'm wondering if they used a tactical maneuver to slow her down and take her out of the car and, well, I don't know. Kill her? Feast on her? Who knows? I don't know what happened. I wasn't there. I didn't see the body. But I know she was dead. and it wasn't a pleasant scene from what I've heard. So this account is actually very educational if you think about it. You learn a lot about them, their ambush attacks and stuff like that. So, well, let's move on to the next terrifying encounter. The second experience or encounter of today is one that the photo that you are seeing is part of this, and it is very terrifying. The events described happened 2 days ago in Oklahoma. I'll describe things to the fullest extent possible. Where I live is a semi-urban area close to a river with construction projects, neighborhoods still surrounded and laced with densely wooded creeks. Despite being graced with a nearby Walmart and shops, my side of the town is rather vacant of people anytime past midnight. Many stretches of streets are without lights and are surrounded by woods. They are pitch black at most times. I've spent hours walking both through the center of town and through these wooded areas to get home, especially at night. I've done so high, drunk. I've done so through the dead of night, and at dusk and dawn as well. Despite the occasional unease, I've never heard or seen anything to panic me except from the hoot of an owl once before. Prior to this, I had the utmost confidence in myself when walking here. I've slept in unfinished houses here with my friends and not been uncomfortable at all. About a week before this, me and my friends had a bonfire at a nice spot on the other side of town. We felt uneasy despite being there often. Once we had gotten set up, our Bluetooth speaker started to glitch. Something was wrong. Suddenly, the song slowed down, played backwards, then played fast before returning to normal. My friend Jay started staring at the wood line not too far off and said, with fear in his voice, that there was something in the woods 7 to 8 feet tall walking and watching us. We eventually booked it. Fast forward to 2 days later. Jay had been wanting to get out of his house for the night. He had been living at a friend's house, and I had nothing to do. We decided to go to the bowling alley nearby and hang out. I had smoked the remains of a blunt, and he was already high. We got there, decided to stay in the parking lot a while, then went inside. We once left, came back. By the time we had decided to leave, it was already closing time, 1 a.m. We were both pretty close to being sober again. We had an enjoyable time. Jay had acquired some alcohol, and we intended to drink it in a remote location and just relax. I knew about a small, partially finished neighborhood on my block that was surrounded by a creek and had a dog park. During the day, the park was a nice retreat from the sun. At night, the park was isolated by trees from the neighborhood, and only a few streetlights gave illumination on the road, which ended at a wood line with a trail leading over the creek. You would have to cross into the darkness, pass over a culvert, and then you were within the park. Jay had suggested we walk into the park and joked about seeing a crawler. Though it was funny, there was a slight hint of concern at the idea. We drove to the small neighborhood and immediately felt deeply uneasy. The street leading to the wood line was straight, and at its end was illuminated by a single tall light. We got there at around 1:05 in the morning. We knew we were going to be posted up for some time and had decided to park backwards to make our escape easier. This put the wood line within about 15 feet behind us. However, Jay had to unplug his new speaker setup from the car battery or risk it dying, which meant we had to get out of the car, open the hood, and get back in. The internal fear was just there, but we both knew it had to be done. There was no choice. There was no banter at this point. I found myself telling him to hurry up and not to stop, not to look around. He didn't listen, but said nothing. I felt watched, and we both could hear subtle quiet noises, which I can't describe as anything but unusual. After a short time, we quickly re-entered the car. At this point, a deep fear and dread had grasped me. The fun of the night had evaporated the moment we had pulled underneath that light. The feeling of being watched left us, looking behind us and around us for a minute or two. We could still hear the faint noises, but they were indiscernible. I tried to change the subject to drinking, but this was shot down with a mutual agreement. We felt surrounded, but we didn't know why, and yet we did know what was doing it. Suddenly, Jay swears he can see something behind us to our left due to my position in the passenger seat. I could not make out what he saw. I started looking out the back right window, and as my eyes adjusted to the darkness, I saw something which still causes the hair on my arms and necks to rise. I looked at it for 15 seconds, processing what I was seeing. I couldn't believe it. About 10 feet away, close to the wood line, or perhaps among it, I saw a form clear as day. It seemed to be broken up by the brush, but it was close and large. I believe I only saw a small part of this thing. I saw no legs or head, but it was almost as if I was looking at its back. The skin was a sickly white. It looked like dry animal skin. Never in my life had I ever seen something which demanded an immediate and overwhelming fear response. I panicked and yelled at my friend, "Drive, just drive now." I know rationally that such beings most likely couldn't do anything to us in a car, but every sense was on overdrive and instinct took over. We immediately hightailed it out of there. I had the chance to look behind us the entire time as we left, and as I was staring back at that light pole from the direction Jay had said he saw something, I saw something for about 2 blinks of an eye run underneath that light pole and disappear into the darkness. It was sickly skinny. It was running on all fours. I saw its head as well. The thing was running incredibly fast, at least as fast as the car was going. At this point, I knew there was 2 of them. I knew they were real, and I knew I was terrified in a way I have never been before. I remembered hearing about these creatures hating cameras, and I told Jay to take us to Walmart right away. As I mentioned earlier, the streets at this time are empty and typically dark and wooded. We were in a state of horror, and we were processing what had just happened. We realized we couldn't return home at this point. The only thing that we could do to pass the night was attempt to sleep. Would be to park in a secure place, which shockingly meant not home. This happened in my block, remember. As we make the 2-mile drive, Jay freaks out and says he saw one running down the street on one of the side roads. Personally, my eyes have terrible night vision. Being that things tend to be blurry in the darkness, I could sense some kind of movement behind us. I could not see anything as certain as I had back at the wood line. We were the only car on the road until the very end of the trip. A sense of exhaustion had hit us as soon as we parked. We finally had time and a chance to process what had just happened. The moment I began to tell what I saw, I started to tear up and cry. Though I was not weeping per se, to my astonishment, he told me what he had seen. Another crouching down, as it often are described, straight arms crossed and all. He also cried and laughed. This laughing and crying occurred multiple times throughout the night. I was stunned, excited, scared, and felt absolute dread as we sat in the emptyish Walmart parking lot at 1:15 in the morning. Nothing in my life had scared me to such an extent that just talking about it could induce fear. As we talked and eventually calmed down as much as one can, Jay had noticed movement from the bushes about 70 to 100 feet in front of us, as we had parked, pointing towards yet another unlit road which ran across another gigantic creek. At this distance and the lighting condition, my vision was blurry, but I could pick up something as well. In the bushes, we could see something resembling a gray mass, which sometimes presented itself as a head, which just ever so barely popped up. We see this for 10-15 minutes, after which point it definitely moved around or another one of them had arrived. The reason being, in another bush to the right, we got a somewhat clearer sight of the thing, as the bush was slightly more lit up. At some point, I saw a pair of skinny white legs inside the bush itself. They ever so slightly shifted around and then disappeared back into the brush. I excitedly told Jay, as this was the creepiest sight of it I had while parked in the lot. At another point, Jay gasped and said it was standing up. Again, it was. Dark out and my vision sucks, but I could yet again sense behind the blurriness that something was indeed there. It was indeed very tall, even above these 4-foot bushes. After this, I see a reflection of 2 tiny lights from around the left bush, but weirdly, almost entirely on the ground. It had to have been in the grass, and the skeptical part of me says it might have been just an animal, but something was definitely reflecting back at us. The entire duration, while parked, we had been taking pictures, and I had the idea to take a video. However, due to the dubious quality of the camera, distance lighting, and unclean windshield, these pictures and video were rather inconclusive. It must be noted that when Jay had attempted to take the first picture, it darted off, and he snapped it halfway through the process, though the image is unsurprisingly unclear. After I took a video, we stopped paying attention to the bush and started talking again. We were exhausted, emotionally in absolute turmoil, and physically looked like we had been up for days on end. We were still uncomfortable, and I was thirsty. At this time, it was closer to 2:30 in the morning. I suggested we go to the gas station that's open 24/7 for some water, and it was much more urban. As we left, we came to a stoplight, and to our right was another set of brush and trees. It went back quite a ways, and was dark past the point, despite us exiting a well-developed parking lot. For example, there was a Sonic directly to our left. Jay had mentioned he had seen something inside of this area watching us before we turned left to the spot at the light. Fear once again struck me as the woods were on my right. The light was red. There were no cars, no people but us. I looked back into the woods, and my eyes were adjusting. I could vaguely make out something, as Jay told me he saw something there. I looked away for a minute, looking back, and locked eyes with it. It must have been behind a tree. I could only see its upper head area. It blended in with the trees by its color, but stood out just the same by its shape. I looked into 2 large voids surrounded by a round head which seemed to be defined in shape by its 2 pits. They seemed to be sunken in, pale white, turned gradually into an abyss of emptiness. It must have been standing, even back a ways. It was much taller than the car. The moment I locked eyes with it, I never blinked, never looked away. All my senses went haywire. Adrenaline immediately hit me. The second I locked eyes with it, I was in a state of internal hell, animal fear. I told Jay I saw it, but I rapidly slid into talking to it. First I tried telling it off, to leave us be, and I then didn't have faith in any higher power, but I quickly started praying to it. I didn't know what else to do. My voice was angry and firm. There was no hint of weakness. Pure instinct was taking over, for as much as one's natural senses can lead them in confronting something that confronts our being as much as this did. No tears grazed my cheeks then. The light would not turn from being red. We were the only car there. We were stuck by the light. And I, the only one looking at this thing, was stuck looking at it. When I concluded my prayer, I told Jay that he needed to run the light. Even as I was doing this, I was staring at it. For what felt like too long, the car finally shot off, and we ran the light. The moment I broke eye contact with it, I burst into tears and started to cry. I rarely cry, and nothing has ever put enough fear into me to make me cry. No crying ever felt as uncontrollable as this, no fear as great as this, no exhaustion, no longing for the day as great as this. There was no evil as great as this, as the one I had just stared into. All light in its eyes were lost. I have never been a firm believer in the idea of absolute good and evil, but since this has changed. When I was talking to it, I was not there. Only the most basic aspect of my being remained to stand up to this creature. No plan, no decision, no resolution, no wisdom, no knowledge can prepare you when you look into this creature's eyes. Anything that happens within your mind during and after this is forever imprinted. We drove to the gas station, and I felt shattered in some way. I was tired, and we spent the night in the parking lot until the sun rose, at which point we then decided to go to our respected homes. If I could recommend a word of advice for anyone looking for these things, don't. But if you do, just know the image of it may be unbearable to your senses. Chances are whatever plans you cooked up to protect yourself or confront it will be conducted under an extreme state of fear or distress. As ready as you think you will be, you won't be mentally, ever. You will have only your gut or God to guide you. It seems to me that the idea that this thing is demonic may have some credence to it, and I've never been particularly predisposed to beliefs. It seems to me it is indeed physical and organic, but there is something to which does feed on fear and knows us deeply. Fear it less, and you shall see it less. Fear it more, and you shall see it more and quickly, as my friend and I did. I don't know if this means talking or thinking. But perhaps common sense would say yes. The idea that it will avoid cameras able to see infrared seems likely to hold water, though I cannot say for certain. I didn't hear some crazy sounds people have heard, and thankfully not. Its sight was enough for me. I also did not talk to it telepathically, didn't hear voices inside of my head either. I know what we saw that night, and it was terrifying. Alright guys, I don't know what is going on. I record all of these so you guys will hear this in the morning. Which means I recorded this last night. And as I was getting ready to record, my head, it was almost like, you ever get that feeling where you stand up too fast? And you get that like really dizzy feeling? I got it. And I have not been able to get rid of it for 3.5 hours. With a slight headache behind my eyes. I don't know if it's because I've been pushing myself harder every day on top of the channel, being a dad to my 2 daughters by myself, which is incredibly hard, as a lot of you know, and then helping my parents because they're both getting older and my dad is just getting sicker. So I apologize if there's any mistakes, which I'm sure there are. So hopefully I can feel better tomorrow and just get some rest. May the Great Spirit be with us all, and may He guide us down that path that we call life. Thank you for all your support, guys. It really means the world to me.